April 14th, 2020, and this meeting is being held by phone as a result of the governor's stay-at-home order. We have an aggressive agenda in front of us today, and we'll be reviewing multiple rules and policies necessary to allow the commission to begin hearing appeals, hopefully in January of 2021. The rules that you'll see today have been taken from the State Board of Education and adapted to reflect the role of the new Charter Commission. We have Chanel Tyler, our interim general counsel, who will walk us through the proposed changes, and Angie Hansen is also on the phone with us to help provide some historical context from the perspective of the State Board of Education. Before we get going, though, I do want to caution our committee that now probably isn't the time for us to consider a dramatic overhaul of the rules or the policies, given where we are in our current environment and the state around the world and the country. And so in order for us to keep the commission's work on track, I think it's important that these be on next week's full board agenda. We have our first reading. So that doesn't mean, though, that we can't come back to the rules at any time or even make any modifications after they've been passed so that we can review, revise, and improve them. But I do want to caution the committee where we are. And before I do get started, or before we get started, I want to make sure that I take a formal roll of all of the committee members. David Hansen.
Present.
Wendy Tucker.
Present.
And if there are any other commission members that are on the WebEx, could you please announce yourself? I think I saw.
This is Tom Griscom. I'm here. It's great to see you and the other committee members. Good work. Thank you.
Is there anyone else on? Okay. Well, at this time, I will go ahead and turn the agenda over to Chanel to walk us through the proposed rules and policies.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start off just kind of giving you an overview of the rulemaking process in general so we can start from that understanding. So there's really three types of rules. What we're going to be looking at today are the ones that deal with the rulemaking hearing, but there's also emergency rules and proposed rules. And just a little bit about emergency rules. These kind of come up in a context of an emergency when the agency doesn't have enough time to really go through the whole rulemaking process. As you'll see later on in the slides, that can be several months to make some rules, so that there is a way that we can make emergency rules if things come up. And it's set forth in statute, the different reasons why you would pass emergency rules. And I just listed some here. And then the other types of rules are proposed rules. These are more so for just like mundane items that are not going to really be controversial, but people still have a mechanism where you can challenge that. So proposed rules, they wouldn't go through the whole rulemaking hearing process. You would just post them on the Secretary of State's website, and people have the opportunity to petition at that point within a certain time period to say, no, I think we need to go through the whole rulemaking hearing process. And the one that is most relevant for our discussion are the rulemaking hearing rules. And these are most common. It should really be like the default in most cases. They are the ones you're going to be, what we're really focused on is making sure that we have proper notice of the fact that we're going to be making rules, and then we're going to hold a hearing. And so my next few slides just kind of walk us through what that looks like, and we're thinking of timeline. So here's our timeline. So today we're meeting with the Rules Committee, and we'll just go over some language. If you all have any questions, we'll flesh out some of the changes that I've proposed. And then in the next couple of days, I'm going to file a notice saying that we're going to have a rulemaking hearing, and that'll allow people to come and come with their concerns about whether or not they think the rules are a good idea, or any kind of things that they think might be helpful. And so we're really thinking 52 days out, because you would have to post it online 45 days in advance, and it takes a little bit of while when it sits at the Secretary of State's office. So really we're thinking 52 days out. So that's why we want to make sure that we're getting that we stay on track so that we're able to start taking appeals at the beginning of next year. And then April 22nd, as you all know, we have the full commission meeting. And so you all will be able to do a first read of the rules and policies. And then coming up in June and July, but right now I'm thinking that rulemaking hearing for June 9th, 2020, and that'll allow us to have enough time to get that notice. And then we can make some additional edits after that. And then, as far as how the hearing goes, if we hear any kind of feedback that would make us want to change some things. And then on June 24th, we have our next commission meeting. We can do a final read of a lot of those rules. And then from that point, we have to, it doesn't stop there. So we would send it up to the AG's office, and they're just going to make sure that it is constitutional. That's one of the things that they're looking for. So it's, as you can tell, it's kind of we have to be forward thinking when we're thinking about what we need to accomplish in these next few meetings. So in August, these are approximate dates. The AG's office would go through this whole process of looking at our forms and seeing if it complies. And then from there, we could file it with the Secretary of State. And then there'll be a process where the General Counsel at that time will defend the rules in front of the Joint Government Operations Committee. And then hopefully around January of 2021, we'll have rules in place so that you all can start hearing appeals. And that should be kind of the end of this chunk for the timeline. These are the kind of things that we're looking at right now. So if you have any questions about any of that, let me know. And if not, then we can move on to some of the changes that I've proposed. So do you all have any questions right now about some of the appeals rules?
Angie, I'm just wondering if you or Tess could just provide some context about the history of the appeals rules as they live in the state board. How old are they? When were they last revised? That type of thing.
Sure. Tess, do you want to take that?
Sure. So the context around the charter school appeals rule is that prior to I would say in the last 6 months, the vast majority of our charter school appeal process for both actually new start appeals, revocation appeals, and renewal appeals lived primarily in policy, and the rule itself was relatively high level. But as an effort, as we're doing with all of our policies at the state board level to look what actually should live in rule, we have moved a lot more of the appeal process into rule. And so the version that Chanel has shared with you is actually the most updated rule that the state board had put together that covering all of the appeals that we consider. That puts substantially more detail into rule than we had previously seen before. There are certainly details that we include in our process and that are important to our process, but are more internal that we have kept in policy and that you'll see reflected in the policies that Chanel shared. Thinking more about the internal operations of each appeal process, which are important to be transparent and communicate to the public, but are more appropriate in a policy than a rule. And so you'll see that reflected here in the policy versions that Chanel has shared. Angie, anything else that I missed that you think would be important context?
Angie, I don't think that we can hear you. I think you're muted still.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Sorry. I was gonna say the only other thing that I would point out is that the version that you all have that is a red line where you can see the changes is actually showing the differences between the state board's current rule, like Tess mentioned, and what the commission's statute says. So a lot of these changes are changes because your all's law that constituted the commission has some different language than what the state board had. And then there's also just some tweaks that that it looks like Chanel made in addition to some of those other changes. And one other thing I also want to point out is I think the purpose of this meeting is really to answer any questions that you guys have about any of these rules or policies. And then Chanel and Tess and Amity and I will go back and make additional edits to these, and then also collect any feedback that we get as part of the rulemaking process to make additional edits. So what you all will see as part of the commission's meeting in April will likely look a little bit different than this because it will be inclusive of a good bit of additional feedback. But really we would want to get, just your questions answered, anything that you feel like isn't addressed that you might want to see addressed either in a rule or a policy would be really good. I know I've already got a couple of questions and items of feedback for Chanel that her and I are gonna definitely talk through as we work on the version that comes to the commission on first reading.
And guys, this is Terrence. Conceptually, we have taken the State Board of Education rules and policies and modified or adapted them to fit our commission.
That is correct, yes. So the state board under the statute had a lot of the functions that you all now have as far as the appellate process. And like Angie said, there are a few tweaks to the statute. So some whole sections of their rules were crossed out on our version. And so if you see something that looks like I've crossed out a whole section or that Angie has gone through, a lot of that was just because the language of the statute was different for the state board. A lot of my changes for the appeals rules were just kind of more minor tweaks as far as changing the word to state board to commission and things like that. There were a few other changes as far as in the first paragraph of the New Start appeals rules and a couple of the other appeals rules, we talk about kind of like a timing difference. I believe that the state board's rule had it 10 days, giving the notice of appeal by 4:30. In my version, there's 11:59. So if you all have questions kind of like that for why I would have made those changes, I'm certainly happy to discuss. Or if you've all seen anything, let me know.
Chanel, would it be helpful for Angie and I to provide specifically on the timing question, what the experience is for the state board staff for the commission members to consider?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, anything that you all, because you all were, like I said, really boots on the ground for a lot of this stuff. So I think it'd be very helpful for the commission to hear your perspective.
Sure. So typically what happens, at least how the state board staff handles the appeal process, is that immediately when we know that a local district has made a decision that could result in the state board receiving an appeal, we communicate to those affected parties either the applicant in the case of a new start appeal, or a charter school operator in the case of a revocation or a non-renewal appeal. They will have 10 days to appeal that decision. Although we always encourage people to submit appeals well before the deadline, we very often were receiving appeals very late in the day on a Friday, because typically local districts have their board meetings on Tuesday nights, which result in appeals coming in on a Friday. And what we found is that a lot of times an applicant or an operator would submit appeal documents, they would be missing something, and the state board staff would have to be communicating with them via email or phone right up until the appeal deadline in order for us to confirm and actually receive an appeal, and then to communicate that to district. So what we learned via the many appeals processes that we ran was that running it and allowing an appeal to be turned in all the way up until midnight on a Friday meant that it was really stressing out the staff and all the other parties to be communicating with the districts and the operators on so late in the evening. And so we revised our policy and our rule to make it a 4:30 p.m. deadline, so that we would be able to get sufficient time to collect the information, review the information, let an applicant or an operator know if they were missing information, be able to share that back to them before the appeal deadline. And then after the appeal deadline, be able to confirm to districts if an appeal has been received and give them a heads up before we requested a notice of information. So certainly the commission, it is up to you all how you want to set that timing deadline. But I would encourage you all to think through what does the timing deadline look like, so that your staff can be communicating that effectively to anyone who might be going through the appeal process.
Certainly, thank you for that feedback, Tess. And one thing that I was thinking when I was going through and making modifications is we also want to be mindful that we're allowing, in the case that the statute allows for 10 days. So my thought was that we don't want to be, we wouldn't want anybody to kind of challenge this to say that we've somehow shortened the 10 days by cutting it off at 4:30 instead of 11:59. And so that was my thought process. And we can certainly discuss, if you all have any kind of feedback on that, of which way you want to go. And certainly we'll, like I said, with Tess and Angie, we'll get together and kind of talk through some of these things. But that was kind of my thought process behind doing the 11:59 instead of the 4:30. And
Wendy, oh, I'm sorry. This is Wendy. I would just say, having served on the board during all of this with Tess and Angie, and I get what you're saying about moving it to 11:59, but I watched how hard they worked on this, and I watched how every process that we went through with appeals, they were constantly trying to figure out how to refine and make the rules better. And so I would tend to think that the way that they were doing it and if it was working, unless there is some legal reason that it's not legal, and I'd love to hear from you and Angie on that. If you have those concerns, I would tend to think we should probably leave it the way they had it, but that's just one of us.
certainly, and I drafted it really so that it wouldn't be so subject to challenge. I mean, I could imagine the case where somebody on the 10th day files some notice of appeal and it's 5:30 and we've cut it off at 4:30. And we don't want to restrict the statute because the statute gives them 10 days. And so my reading of the 10 days would encompass until 11:59. And that language is in 49-13-108B. So I don't know if that maybe gets to some of your concern. I do think that it could be something that a real weakness for us legally if we restrict it to 4:30. And I understand definitely the concerns of the staff. But I just want to be consistent to make sure that if the statute allows them 10 days, that we're giving them the 10 days and we're not somehow restricting them.
And if Angie's still on, Angie, did you guys address that? Because, you know, I'm not an education lawyer, I'm a lawyer. And if, I mean, my reading of it without any research at all, so take that giant grain of salt, is that it's giving days, not hours. And so if you have, I mean, I don't know that you have to do to midnight, but I don't know. So Angie, did you guys have a chance to look at that?
So the way that we approached it is that the law gives agencies the ability to further define laws in their rules. So in terms of 10 days, we were defining that as by 4:30 p.m., essentially the business day for the state board, and not extending it beyond that, plus balanced with the need for our staff to be able to process those and get responses and questions answered to not only the applicants who have submitted an appeal, but then also to districts, letting them know whether or not any of their charter schools have appealed. We can certainly continue to talk about it with Chanel and her team and see. I think if we can hopefully come to some sort of happy medium there and balancing the two interests, that's where we were coming from a legal perspective, and defining it as 4:30 in terms of the business day, but then also under our ability to further define what the law says in the rules.
Absolutely. I think that'll be something that we definitely can circle back on in the interim between now and the first reading of the rule. Looking on from there, I don't know that there's a lot of changes. I know Angie mentioned that she flagged a few. So Angie, I don't know if you want to go in particular where I talk about responses to document requests. I believe the policy it said that I took the language from had 5 days. I just added a little bit of leeway time, but it might be that, as your concern stated, that might be too much time, and we were putting the commission in a bind.
Yeah, so as you know, 2 kids, it's been a little crazy. So I sent Chanel what she's referring to. I sent her a few comments on the materials that you all were provided. So I can walk through some of those just to like spark some conversation and just give some context to what we were thinking. So I believe if you're looking at the appeals rule, for those of you who have it pulled up on your screen at home, on the top of page 2, there is language that Chanel inserted that says if the commission sends a request for information, that the applicant is requested to comply with the document request within 5 calendar days or as soon as possible, but in no event more than 10 calendar days after the request. My only feedback there was, even though the commission has 15 days longer than the state board had, in terms of state board had 60 days to make a decision on the appeal, the commission has 75. Whenever we were sending requests for information, and Tess may want to weigh in here too, it was always a really tight timeline in terms of us running our process and needing very much to have that information by those 5 days. I'm nervous that you may be hamstringing the staff by saying, well, you could have 10 days if you needed it, because in many appeals, in our experience, we've had to send multiple requests. And so then you're getting into your 20 days to get information that you badly need to help make the decision. So I just think it's worth considering keeping that at 5 days or something in between 5 and 10 that you all are comfortable with. But I just want to caution you about going too far beyond that.
Thank you for that. I definitely think that's something to consider as well when we're going back and kind of tightening up some of this language.
Sure. The next one was, I just wanted to clarify, and you'll see, I think this comment is in the version that you all received. If you scroll down a little bit on paragraph 5, it says the commission staff shall assemble a charter application review committee comprised of highly competent teams of internal and external evaluators. It's not that we didn't delete highly competent because we don't think that those members will be highly competent. It's just that it was flagged by Chanel's colleagues at the AG's office that potentially could open the commission and or the board up to liability if somebody tried to argue whether or not somebody was highly competent. The language there is still that they would have to be an evaluator with relevant and diverse educational, financial, legal expertise. And so you're putting in there the qualifications that you want. It's just taking that language out to protect from any potential liability. The other comment that I had is under 5A, number 3, Chanel added providing an in-depth evaluation of the statutorily required elements as something that the review committee would need to do. I just want to point out that I think it's fine to keep that, but that is all subsumed within the scoring criteria rubric that the review committee will be filling out based on the application. So the application includes all of those statutorily required elements, and the rubric evaluates that. So you can keep it in, but it's sort of a little bit redundant when you're already having there in one that they're going to be using the scoring criteria. My only other comment that was around calling it an open meeting versus a public hearing. And I 100% see why Chanel made that change, because the state board statute calls it a public hearing, and the commission statute just tweaked that language to say an open meeting. The only reason why I would give you all, at least put a bug in your ear about maybe keeping the language public hearing, is because it makes it, I think, a little bit more clear that this isn't a meeting that involves the commission members. So the way that it currently works at the state board process is the staff holds a public hearing, which is further laid out in here that it's chaired by the executive director or the staff. The applicant comes and gives a presentation, the district gives a presentation, we collect public comment, all of that is recorded. Our board members know that they can come and sit in the audience. I know Wendy did that a few different times at our public hearings. And then that is all provided to the board members as part of the record that they review prior to the actual board or commission meeting where they're considering the appeal and making a decision. Part of this was done this way because we know how hard it is to get a 9-member board all together in person to have a public hearing and then again bring them back together a couple of weeks later to have another meeting to make the decision. So this allows the staff to run the public hearing, still record it, collect all of the information, and then still comply with the law, which requires that they make their decision in an open meeting within the 75 days. So that is the reason for that feedback there. It's a really small tweak, but I think it makes it just a little bit more clear that the commission members aren't necessarily chairing this hearing. It also gets rid of the need to have to comply with all of those open meeting requirements that go along with when all the commission members come together. So while it's a public meeting, it's publicly posted, all of those things, you're not having to do live streaming and things that you would if the commission members were all there together and essentially chairing that public hearing.
Thank
Can
you.
can I just ask Angie, just to make sure I remember correctly, and I know we're going to be NACSA trained next week, but NACSA's best practice on that is that the staff, or that it's separate from the voting body, right? So the process you laid out isn't just because it was hard to get 9 people together to do all of those, which would have been impossible, I think, but also that it's the best practice, right?
That's correct. This was all based, and Tess can speak to this a little bit. All of our policies and rules were based off of very close consultation with NACSA at the very beginning when the state board became an appellate authorizer. Tess, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, and I just think it's kind of back to the staff versus commission member distinction, that there are boards that actually have public hearings with applicants, and there is a long back and forth, sometimes, which can lead to diversions from the quality of the application. And so by having it to be really a staff-driven process as it relates to looking at the quality of the application, public hearing, public comment, and then that all feeding up into the recommendation, it solidifies what is considered a staff function, what is considered the commission member functions, which is ultimately the ultimate decision maker based on the information that you received.
Absolutely. Do you have any other thoughts on that? So that'll be something that we'll circle back on. I like that distinction there, just to make sure that people are aware that this is not what we're not contemplating, that this is just going to be an ordinary meeting situation. So certainly thanks for those thoughts.
I think those were my main pieces of feedback on the rules. I don't know if others have questions or thoughts.
So if there are no other thoughts on that, a lot of what we were looking at were the new start appeal rules, but a lot of that is also replicated in the renewal application appeal rules and the revocation appeals. And Angie, I don't think that you had any kind of different comments between those two rules. So if you all don't see anything else on those two, we might transfer over into the public hearing rules.
6.1.3.
To the public records rules. Is everybody ready?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just wanting to go ahead and flag for you public records rules. Now, right now we're in a position where we don't really have a place for people to come inspect the records. And so, but we want to go ahead and get started on the rulemaking process. So what I'm proposing is that we adopt a public records policy for right now, but then also be forward thinking about what kinds of, about having that public records rule, because it is a requirement that we adopt a public records rule so that people can come in and inspect our records. The only reason, like I said, right now, that I think that we might have to hold off on actually getting it all the way through is that we don't have the place to inspect. So we'll fill that in as soon as that becomes, as soon as we have that information. So just looking at some of the public records rule changes, there weren't very many. I just used, again, a lot of the state board's former rules, or sorry, the state board's rules regarding public records. Do you all have any questions, just kind of looking over those? A lot of that just follows the statute. I think maybe the only changes that we really made was at one point we say that the Attorney General would be the party that we would go to if we have a question. And that was really the largest change I think that there was, other than changing state board to commission. So if there's no questions on the public records rule, we can start moving into some of the policies, and I'll just flag for you the public records rule that I have right here looks exactly like the public records policy that I'm proposing. But I guess we can go ahead and just stay in order. So the next one would be the charter school appeal policy. Did anybody have any questions? Again, that looks a lot like the rules. Any other thoughts on that? Angie, Tess, any other feedback? I know, again, it's kind of exactly like the rule, just kind of more so bringing into the internal policies. I think maybe there was a change. In some places, I referred to it as the director of schools, but I believe that you all actually have other policies where we're calling him an executive director. So I'll probably clean that up just to be consistent throughout all the policies so that nobody is confused that, oh, are these two different parties? We just want to make sure that people know that it's the same person. And again, so like if we end up changing some language in the rule, kind of like where we were talking about giving for document requests, allowing, maybe cutting back onto the 5 days and, the 5 to 10 day window, we would also, want to change it in the policy as well to just be consistent. But other than that, I don't know that there's anything, again, with the open meeting, public hearing distinction. If we change that in the rule, we'll also change that in the policy. Do you all have any questions just looking over the appeals policy? Any feedback? Okay. So then going from the appeals policy is the application policy. I don't know that there was a lot that we changed there other than just changing, again, the party to being the commission. Angie, Tess, you all have anything that you saw in the application appeals, the application appeals review policy?
Sorry, I'm taking a look real quick. Let me.
And just as Angie's doing this, I'll provide the commission members some context here. So this is really specific to an application review for the New Start appeal process. The reason why we don't combine it with the appeal process policy that you all just looked at is because in the revocation and non-renewal policies, we reference things that happen in the appeals policy as kind of our big umbrella appeals policy, and then we're referencing back, for example, to the public hearing part of the appeals policy. So for us, it was important to have two distinct policies here so that people who wanted to know, okay, how will the state board look at the actual application and conduct that process, that they could look into the appeals, the application review process. They could see exactly how a capacity interview was going to be run, as opposed to trying to put all of that in the general appeals policy.
I don't think I had any additional thoughts on this one either.
Does anybody have any thoughts on this? So if not, then we can keep moving along to the actual renewal and renewal appeals policy. Again, a lot of this tracks just the language that we had in the rule. So to the extent that we change it in the rule, we'd also reflect it in the policy. Angie or Tess, did you all have any thoughts on the renewal appeals policy?
I had one thought. This is Angie. I saw, Chanel, that you all had deleted the sections on how the commission will handle renewal applications that are submitted to the commission by schools that the commission already oversees. And so I was just wondering, are you planning on putting that in a separate policy? And if not, I think we need to think about either putting it back in here or doing it just needs to be addressed somewhere.
No, I definitely agree. I think that it would be good as my thinking is it's good as a separate policy, just kind of backtracking to our rule regarding the renewals. A lot of that language was talking about when you appeal from the local board of education, just kind of setting it out where that we have something that's talking about, well, we're really just appealing the renewal from something that we've already authorized. And that's more forward thinking. So this kind of the stuff that I've provided here are things that I think we'll need right away. But I welcome you all's thought on that. But I agree. I think we will eventually have to have a policy on that as well.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure you were planning to address it somewhere.
Are there any other thoughts on this?
The only other, sorry. feel like this is the Angie and Chanel show. Hopefully this is helpful to you all though. The only other thing that I flagged that we hadn't already talked about was on page, I believe, 3 of the policy in E, where it talks about interviews. And I know this is based off of the state board's language, but as I was reading it, I think it's a little bit unclear because it currently says the commission shall interview the governing body. It refers to the application review policy that we just talked about, which makes it clear that that interview is actually done by an interview panel. But I think if someone was just reading this policy, they would think that they're going to have the opportunity to sit down with all of the commission members. And so I would suggest maybe just some clarifying language there that maybe the commission staff shall assemble an interview panel to interview the governing body. Something to tweak that first sentence to make that a little bit more clear. And then I think I had a similar language around the public hearing in the next section, just to make it clear that that is staff driven versus commission members.
Certainly. Tess, or does anybody have anything to add? I agree with going in and cleaning up that language. All right, so if there are no other thoughts on the renewal appeals policy, we can go to the revocation appeals policy.
Chanel, really quick before you all dive into that, I have another call that I have to be on, so I have to hop off, but I think my comments were consistent, I think, between the renewal and the revocation policy, and happy to continue to work with you guys and support you all on this. Chanel's been awesome. I think you all are really lucky to have her, but Tess and I are here to help her and help you all as well. So excited to continue working with you and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm going to hop off.
Thanks,
Thank
Angie.
you. Have a good
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Bye.
So going on to the revocation appeals policy, again, a lot of this stuff looks like the rule. And so I would insert Angie's comments here as well with some of her thoughts. I don't know if there's anything that stood out as being different that we might want to discuss in the revocation other than like the stuff that we pointed out in the renewal policy. So, but if anybody has any questions, I'm certainly here to answer them. Tess, anybody have any feedback? Okay. So then our last policy is the public records policy. And again, like I said, this public records policy looks exactly like the rule that I'm proposing. And the reason, again, like I said, was just because we don't have the place to inspect records yet, but we want to go ahead and have these things in place because it is a requirement that we provide information for people to come in and inspect the records and how do they get in touch with people. And a lot of this language just tracks the statute. So, but if anybody has any questions or thoughts, I'm certainly happy to entertain those as well.
That's a good reminder to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded as a public record. Forgot to do that at the beginning.
That's great. So that concludes all of the rules and policies that I was going to present today. Do you all have any other thoughts, any questions? If you want to go back to one, I'm certainly happy to do that. I don't see any, so like, I'll start, oh, Terrence, yes.
I guess just one comment upon my reflection and then also hearing the conversation with you guys and with you and the charter, the state board. I think as an organization, we should be as liberal as possible in the context of giving folks an extra 4 hours to make submissions or giving folks an extra 5 days if the particular statute allows additional time. I'd hate for the public to think that we are that we're sort of tightening without true justification. I do understand Wendy and the state board's points around just the general logistics of getting applications in, but I'd rather our staff work a little harder to make sure the public knew that we were being as transparent and as close to the rules or the statute as possible. That's sort of my initial feeling after reviewing the changes and hearing the discussion.
Thank you. And yes, we'll take that back too. I do want to make sure that I point out, so the 1159 change in particular, that comes directly from the statute saying that you had the 10 days, and that was my reasoning for that. But as far as the document request, that might be something where you all have a little bit more, I mean, if you're trying to stay in line with the statute, you have a little bit more flexibility there just because this is some kind of internal process. And if you feel that you're going to end up really constrained, if you have an extra 5 days for something, I do want to, flag that for you all. That might be a consideration. So I don't know if that changes anything on your comments.
No, thank you. And thank you for your hard work and really working with us, especially given the circumstance. This is really good information, and these are really helpful documents to get us off to a really good start.
Thank you. And I'm so thankful to Tess and Angie and Amity. They've been a big help as well as far as their feedback. Tess, did you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I just think, I completely agree. You all, that these are your policies, your rules. You all can determine how you want to handle them. So encourage you all to do that. I think if you all do decide on moving it to a midnight timeline, I would encourage you all to put in policy or rule expectations regarding any response from your staff to applicants. So if someone turns in something at 9 p.m. and it's not complete, is there an expectation that staff will be letting an applicant know that it's incomplete and they have 3 hours to turn additional information, or is it's on the responsibility of the applicant or the operator based on what you all put in rule and policy to complete the submission? So again, you all have the wherewithal to do it. I just would encourage you all, based on the experience we've had of originally having a midnight deadline and then recognizing that we weren't feeling as communicative as possible and having to say to someone on a Saturday morning, I'm so sorry, you turned something in at 11:30 at night and it's not complete and we can't accept it. Those are difficult conversations we've had as well. So just want to make sure you all kind of know the pros and cons as you're going into these policy and rule making discussions.
Yeah, and
I asked a question about that. I'm sorry, Chanel. So I don't know the answer to this. I'm hoping somebody does on this call. If the application is turned in and it does not have all of the components under the statute, like you said, Tess, and I guess that happened quite a bit where you'd have to say, hey, you left out this piece or this piece isn't complete. If that happens and the deadline goes, can we accept legally anything else, or is that applicant done for that year?
So I will share how the state board has handled that. Certainly, Chanel, as the council here, you can share additional thoughts. We have determined that if it was incomplete and did not meet the required elements as outlined in the state board rules, so there are, I think, 4 or 5 required elements to an appeal. After the deadline passed, we could not accept that appeal. The reason is because if we started accepting applicants that were not complete, then we didn't have a standing to say that any of those elements were required. So we had to have some very difficult conversations to say, I'm sorry you didn't turn in your statement, but that's a required element of the state board's rule on appeals, and therefore we cannot accept the appeal, and your process is done. Those are not, there are not fun conversations to have at any point in time. They're also not fun conversations to have at 4:15 to say, you have 15 minutes to get me this document because your deadline's at 4:30. But the way the state board has handled it is, in order to protect the integrity of our process and to be able to utilize the rule in its entirety, that the required elements were the required elements, and if it was not complete in accordance with our rule, we did not accept the appeal. Chanel, I will open it up to you as if you have additional thoughts there that you would want to share from a commission perspective.
Absolutely. And your way of reading the statute and your practices are in line with what I was envisioning as well. I mean, the statute says that you have 10 days to file your notice of appeal, and we're saying it encompasses these things. And so I'm not really inclined to say that we should allow additional days. And so maybe that's something that you all balance. And on one hand, I really do think that there might be a concern if we cut short that time to 4:30. And so that's just something to weigh out there. But on the other hand, if we don't cut it short at 4:30, then maybe there'd be people who feel as though you should have let me know, and so I definitely see both sides.
Is there a way to craft the rule to address, I get what Terrence is saying completely too. We want applicants to feel welcome. Is there a way to address the rule where, and again, I don't know the answer to this, that's why I'm asking, where the materials are due by whatever time, noon, 4 or whatever, with the understanding that if there's any follow-up, they have until midnight? Is there like a way to like that? I don't know if that puts more on the staff, but a way that then they have that little screening time, so they're still getting till midnight, but the staff is getting the time to see if their piece is missing. I don't know.
That's a great suggestion, Wendy.
That is, yeah. And I'll discuss that too. But I do think that's a good balance. I don't know. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? So like the materials due at a certain time, and then built in with the understanding that we're kind of screening it until a certain cutoff time. Anybody have thoughts?
I was just thinking, having scored federal grants before, this is Amity, and then I'll let the chairman of the committee weigh in. It's not unusual to have a due date, a timeline of noon for submission. Staff's response is either noon the next day or 4 o'clock the same day. But then there's this window of opportunity for responsive documents as a result of anything the staff has flagged as either a shortcoming or additional information.
That's
very similar to what Wendy suggested.
Yeah, that was a good, yeah.
That's a really good suggestion, Emily. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Wendy, because from the state board staff perspective, we really saw it as a customer service of wanting to review the appeal that was submitted and be able to flag ahead of time, like this is missing and you have 20 minutes to get it in. That was really a part of our communication. So I think any way that you all could put that into practice, so it would be something that's carried forth even when staff turns over, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Could we get some direction from the chairman of the committee for council, I think is what I think we might be needing before you go to first read?
Yeah. I think in terms of your suggestion, Amity, and then Wendy, even your comment, I think making sure that Chanel, when you're making these tweaks, that we're mindful of staff response time.
Mm-hmm.
So maximizing the public's ability or school's ability to provide information as much as is allowed under statute.
Okay. Certainly. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Amity, I don't think on this end, because I'll circle up and kind of tweak the language just to reflect what we've discussed here today for first read. I don't think that there's anything on this end. Amity, are you all?
I just wanted to also introduce Janet Kleinfelter from the Attorney General's office, who has also been providing support for the commission behind the scenes, and particularly around the public records space. And Janet, you don't have to unmute yourself if you don't want to, but if you'd like to say hello, we'd like to have you say hello.
Hi, I'm here, and I apologize that you can't see my face. My camera has not been working on my computer. And our
Says everybody that works for state government. Wink, wink.
Well, I figure our IS staff is probably got better, higher priorities than fixing the camera on my computer.
Yeah. And then also on the call, who was introduced in last week's committee call, so no need to unmute yourself, is Chris Reynolds, who will be contracted staff for the commission. I did hear back from the department staff today. They expect an execution date of May 4th for him to be able to begin work. That's all, Terrence.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you, Chanel, and thanks to our colleagues at the State Board of Education for helping us. And again, this is our starting point. We will have an opportunity, of course, at first read and then subsequent reading to make improvements or enhancements. But I think we're off to a really good start, especially knowing that the state board was using a lot of the best practices were permitted at a national level. And as we think about being a national best-in-class organization, that is really exciting to hear as our starting point and making sure that we continue to build off of that. So again, hats off to you, Chanel. Thanks, Amity and team, for also supporting our work as we continue to charge ahead on behalf of kids.
Yep, and just a special kudos to Tess. I know that a lot of this is her original work, so thank you for your support through this transition as well. We have NACSA training this week, and then you all will, this committee will have another body of rules and policies to take a look at, so you're not finished. Is that a little Patterson there, Terrence?
It is. Would you like to say hello, Trey?
Say hello.
Hello.
I think you'd like to adjourn the meeting so we can start the second half of school day.
Yeah. That's a great cue.
All right, guys. I will see everybody at our board meeting, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We're
Thanks,
adjourned.
Chanel.
Thank you.